Hey YouTube, we're almost to the end of 31 Days of Tarot. It's day 30, and the question is, what tarot card do you feel best represents you, and why? So I have already talked about how the Queen of Swords represents me in previous videos. It is still very much true. And so I wanted to, rather than rehash that, use this video as an opportunity to talk a little more about boundaries and the Queen of Swords, and to actually share something interesting that I came upon recently when doing actually a deck interview for the 78 Tarot Elemental, which recently arrived. When I was doing that interview, I'm actually going to read you part of what I wrote down here. One of the interview spreads I did, I pulled that I was ready to clear the Queen of Air or Swords and ready to embrace and step into the King of Water or Cups. And what I wrote down about this at the moment was and I had also, the work we were meant to do together was the Four of Air or Swords. That's relevant to this. So what I wrote down was, we're meant to work on rest and putting down the mental focus for a little while together, so Four of Swords. Clearing the Queen of Swords focus on intellect and boundaries and active protection. Instead, I'm ready to step into being able to operate from abundance and set boundaries through filling my cup with rest rather than through keeping others out. And so this was kind of a revelation for me, because I think sometimes of the Queen of Swords, the feeling of the Queen of Swords and the way the Queen of Swords does boundaries has a little bit of an air of keeping others out. Often she's depicted with her sword in front of her, like she's ready to go, she will fight you. And sometimes I feel that way. But what I think is interesting about King of Cups, and I had gotten King of Cups a fair bit in the last year or two, and not always known what to do with him exactly, but I think that the King of Cups is still, I think at first I thought, oh, watery, not as many boundaries, which is interesting because I'm full of water sign. I'm real heavy water, but I looked at it and was like, oh, I don't know, it's a very nurturing figure. But what I like about the King of Cups, and I think it's Lindsay Mack that describes this way, that the King of Cups is able to, is a master of holding space for himself and others at the same time. And when you think about that as an archetype, the King of Cups has boundaries, but he accesses those boundaries through filling his cup all the way up to the brim. So getting what he needs, being a master of receiving, not just giving, and having that full well that's continuously being filled to offer from. And so in that kind of cosmology of boundaries, the boundaries are more about operating from a place of fullness and not letting yourself get too drained, so that you can continuously keep going, and so that the giving feels good and natural. And I've talked on this channel before about how the story I have is that generosity has to be painful or suffering, or it has to hurt. It's not real generosity unless it hurts. That is something I'm getting a therapist to talk about with, but it just keeps coming up for me in tarot. The issues we have in life always come up in tarot. That is one that keeps coming up. And so I was thinking about how I sometimes feel like I'm quote unquote receiving too much. If I get a card like the Empress, it's about receiving. I'm like, oh, that's not for me. I'm receiving too much, because I don't think of myself as a generous person. So I think of myself as oh, I'm not giving, and therefore I shouldn't be receiving because I'm not giving. But that doesn't really make sense. It's not good math, because if you're always empty, you're not receiving too much. You're not letting yourself receive anything, because you're well, I didn't give anything, so I don't deserve to receive anything. I'm going to stay empty because empty is safe and empty is what protects me. That is my boundary. It's I'm keeping everything out, Queen of Swords style. And this is a shadow of the Queen of Swords. I'm not saying the Queen of Swords is necessarily like this in her highest expression, but I think one shadow of the Queen of Swords could be keeping emotion out, keeping fulfillment, emotional fulfillment out, operating from an intellectual place and saying here is my wall. And that isn't a way to achieve abundance. So if I'm like, okay, great, I'm great at boundaries, like nobody can touch me, I'm a badass, that's great and all. And it means that like I don't have to give because I haven't let people into my circle that would expect me to give. But it also means that I don't receive. So contrast that shadow version of the Queen of Swords to the healthy King of Cups, which is like a flow, a great like ever evolving, ever running flow. I think that also you can reference the Ten of Cups. There's a lot of depictions of the Ten of Cups with like back and forth, or even Temperance with that back and forth flow. So I'm thinking a lot about that flow and how holding the Queen of Swords as my main tarot archetype might be lacking in some way, or might reflect some of my shadow stuff. I think like we can get really good at operating from lack. You can be excellent at operating from lack. You can be super fierce, super resilient. I mean, I think about the way we talk about, in a really like harmful way, the way we talk about like black bodies, especially black women and femmes, is like, you're so resilient, you're so fierce, you're so awesome. But like what we're not acknowledging, what white people aren't acknowledging, we like create those stereotypes, is the fact that, yeah, like some people have had to operate from a place of lack, but putting it all into like fierceness and resiliency, it takes some of the blame away from us for creating that sense of lack and for not offering abundance to the people who have to operate in that way. So I come from a place of privilege where I am a white person and don't have that kind of, you know, oppression cloud around me all the time. But I think at an interpersonal level, it can still, like, even just not allowing myself to receive certain things means that I might be super fierce, but it also, like, that I think sometimes when we operate from a place of necessity where we don't have a lot, we don't allow ourselves to receive a lot, or we're not able to receive a lot through no fault of our own, it can keep us from gaining important skills in nurturing, in nourishing ourselves and others, in, you know, what would it be like to operate from a place of abundance? What would it be like to feel good about giving? Like, what would it be like for taking care of others to feel like aligned and good for me? Which in theory, as a strongly Cancer person, astrologically, like that should be part of my birthright. That should be part of how I operate, right? As Cancer is this duality between caretaking and nurturing and offering, and also needing to be secure and have your own little pillow fort. So yeah, I bring that up to say that I think Queen of Swords is still the correct like answer for me in terms of what card represents me. But for a while I was like aspirational Queen of Pentacles, and I think I'm now also aspirational King of Cups. I'm thinking about how I can move towards that archetype in 2020. Particularly from a starting point, even though it feels scary and a little guilt-inducing, from a starting point of working on that receiving portion. Because in order to kickstart the motor, where can I receive from those who are freely offering nurturing and caretaking to me, which I have those people in my life, and I talked to at least one of them saying like, hey, I'm having this challenge and I want to accept from you, and it's really hard. But if I can fill that cup up, then it allows me to be able to continue to give, whether directly back to the same person or to others. And that is something I'd like to be able to do. So, I don't know, maybe I went a little deep on that one. But feel free to subscribe if you're not already and you like deep things, because that's what I do here. And check out the hashtag below for others' responses to this prompt.